After the international success of Alex Garland's and Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, the zombie genre underwent what many would consider to be a reawakening or a modern-day renaissance. As such, Zack Snyder's successful 2004 remake of Dawn of the Dead was shortly released after the rage-fueled success of the British film, thus prompting the OG king of zombies himself to release Land of the Dead in 2005. We even got the greatest zombie comedy of all time during this time period, with the release of Edgar Wright's Shaun of the Dead. Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead comics also began to slowly take off in comic book stores around this time, and games like Dead Rising were released to outstanding levels of success, while the soon-to-be breakout title of Left 4 Dead was under development at Valve, a game that drew heavy inspiration from 28 Days Later. But it wasn't just movies, games, and comic books that we got during this time period. You see, we even got the single greatest zombie novel in human history, being Max Brooks' 2006 publication of World War Z. Given that the undead genre was in high demand, and given the box office gains of 28 Days Later, DNA Films opted to milk the cow created by Garland and Boyle. As a result, 28 Weeks Later was released in theaters in 2007. And what audiences were truly treated to was one of, if not the greatest opening sequences to a zombie movie in cinema history. Which, believe me when I say this, hyped moviegoers right off the bat. That is until the rest of the film ran its course and left many feeling unsatisfied. But that cliffhanger ending with the infected running in Paris was a pure chef's kiss moment if you ask me. And let me tell you, that cliffhanger left us all wanting a sequel. One that we waited over 20 years for, and I gotta tell you, for some people, 28 years later was a real disappointment, and for some it was actually a refreshing take on the genre. But maybe I can talk about that in another video. Now, one of the reasons for this disappointment with 28 Weeks Later was the rampant plot-induced stupidity that plagued the insanely contrived plot of the film. And given that this movie is teeming with imbecilic decision-making, I've decided to imagine just how different events would have been within the canon of 28 Weeks Later, had the characters in this high-octane film simply applied rudimentary critical thinking skills. Suffice it to say, the movie would have been incredibly short. That being said, we're still going to cover how the timeline would change had the main cast merely possessed a few more IQ points. But before we get this party started, allow me to ask you for a very small favor. Did you know that most of you enjoying my content aren't actually subscribed? And did you know that this very statistic makes me cry myself to sleep every night? It's rather exhausting. If you like this sort of content, please consider smashing that subscribe button, as doing so greatly helps the channel, which in turn allows me to continue entertaining you. Now, with that quick and shameless plug out of the way, allow me to get the ball rolling on this fun thought experiment by beginning this what-if video at the very start of the film. Don and his merry gang of survivors are held up at some old couple's home. Then, after some brief exposition, a random kid starts banging on the front door. Now, in the canonical timeline, Alice convinces Don to let the little boy into the house, and this serves as the ultimate catalyst for everything that would eventually transpire shortly after. But had Alice been more intelligent, and had the group not suffered from being mentally handicapped, they would have been able to easily deduce that the kid was clearly panicked for an obvious reason. Now, considering the state of affairs in Britain at the time, it would have been fairly fucking safe to assume this child was being chased by a horde of ravenous, rage-infected Englishmen and women. As such, the smart move would have been to just stay quiet, stay away from the windows, and leave the kid to fend for himself. One life is just not worth risking the lives of 6 people. The result of this simple inaction would have eventually forced the minor to run off on his own, an action that would have driven most of the infected away from the cottage. And if Karen had not looked out the window, the infected would have never broken into the home. Assuming the infected would have lingered in the area despite the fact that the child would have drawn most of them away from the area. And just like that, everyone survives. And not just everyone in that house, but everyone in the film, aside from the kid. Alice not getting infected means that ultimately there is no second outbreak. The repatriation of Britain goes along successfully, and we end up with a boring film about the aftermath of the rage virus pandemic. But let's just ignore that happy ending and assume shit hits the fan anyway and we get to the iconic scene of Don abandoning his idiotic wife. What if Alice just left the kid in the closet and ran off with her husband? The infected would have burst into an empty room. they wouldn't be intelligent enough to check the closet for the kid, and both Don and Alice would have successfully made it to the boat, where Jacob would have likely still gotten bodied. But with Don and Alice safely adrift down the stream, the second outbreak would have successfully been averted. Now, if Alice got infected at this point in the story, while being with Don, he'd likely eventually kiss her out of sheer joy over the fact that she didn't turn. And then he would have been infected, and then he would have bodied Alice, and then the infected Don would have gone on to starve, and the second outbreak would have been completely prevented. Even if Don gets fucked here and Alice is the only one to make it to safety via the boat, we'd still see the second outbreak averted because there wouldn't be anyone stupid enough to kiss her if she was infected. Anyways, I'm just gonna ignore that too and pick up where we see the two little shits sneaking out of the safe zone. Imagine if Doyle just fired a warning shot at the kids, causing them to shit themselves, before they then promptly freeze in place. Soldiers go get them, and the kids never bump into their asymptomatic mother at their old home. But given that Alice had been surviving up until this point in the movie, it would be fairly reasonable to assume that the military would eventually discover her. However, under these circumstances, they wouldn't immediately know she's Don's wife. So, given this, they would process her, test her blood, discover her affliction, and then she'd promptly be executed as a direct command from General Stone. Even if they tell Don of this news, it's highly likely they'll have the information needed at hand to inform him of her infected status. Something they only discovered while Don was sneaking into Alice's holding bay in the canonical timeline. Be that as it may, had Sergeant Doyle just done his fucking job and fired a warning shot, the second outbreak would have been averted. Alright, let's just ignore all of that and fast forward to the discovery of the asymptomatic carrier known as Alice. I want you to imagine, what if the US-led NATO repatriation force was actually intelligent? No way in hell would a glorified janitor like Don have access to Alice's quarantine room. Crisis averted. Okay, let's just assume he has access anyway. Clearly, an intelligent military operation with plenty of intel on the dangers of the rage virus would have had the foresight to post some guards to control access to Alice's room. Crisis averted. Alright, I get ya. Let's say there's no guards and Don gets into the room with Alice anyway. What if Don just wasn't a fucking moron? Well, I would imagine a smart person would be wise enough to ponder the following.
Why is my wife being quarantined? Why is she tied down to the bed? What the hell is up with her eye?
Maybe.
Just maybe.
It wouldn't be smart to exchange bodily fluids with her. After all, this bitch has been alone on an island that was once teeming with infected freaks who were all carrying a
blood-borne disease.
Crisis averted. Hey, you wanna know a fun fact? We're gonna ignore that fucking shit too. Let's just assume shit really hits the fan now and the second outbreak is underway. What if the military wasn't managed by a bunch of smooth-brained dotards? Well, for starters, they wouldn't have moved everyone into an enclosed basement where the rage virus could spread like wildfire. Nah, you see, the intelligent move would have been to order everyone to lock themselves in their own rooms, turning off all lights, shutting all curtains, and barricading all doors and windows, while remaining totally silent. This would prevent the virus from spreading further, because now the only infected individuals the military would have to worry about are the few soldiers Don infected and Don himself. Plus, it's just common sense to fragment all potential vectors of infection. The rage virus only spreads through physical contact, so the best response to such a contagion is to separate everyone instead of crowding them into a kill room. Remember COVID? This situation would have been greatly aided by some social fucking distancing. Soldiers could have then easily formed into squads, and then they could have slowly and methodically cleared each and every structure in the safe zone until all threats were effectively eliminated. And just like that, crisis averted. But nah, let's just ignore that too. Instead, I want you to ponder, what if Hawkeye's black friend used a few extra brain cells? Remember the ending of the movie? Hawkeye told his pal to go ahead and leave if he wasn't at the stadium. Now, I get it. Jeremy Renner's battle buddy had a heart and couldn't just leave two miners to fend for themselves. But what harm could checking for bites really cause? Speaking for myself, if I were in a zombie apocalypse, or rage outbreak, I'd rather be safe than sorry. I mean, sure, Flynn had no knowledge of the asymptomatic carrier status of Alice or Andy, so he wouldn't have any real reason to check for bites. If these kids were infected, they wouldn't be at the stadium to begin with. But it was standard practice or standard operational procedure to check every survivor on the island, just like they did with Alice, despite not having any reason to assume she could be infected. And Flynn should have known that. So why not just check? Well, in this hypothetical scenario, Flynn is smart and he decides to check. And just like that, he notices that little Andy has a bite mark. He then tells Tammy she can leave with him or stay with Andy. Regardless of the decision made, the outbreak never makes it to Paris. Crisis averted. As it turns out, there are plenty of points in this movie where had the characters been just a bit smarter, the story would have ended much sooner. And I don't think I can say this for many zombie movies and shows. The number of times the second outbreak could have been prevented is wild. Anyways, if you like this sort of content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell as well, that way you may be notified when I publish a new video. And also remember that you may opine anytime if you feel so inclined down in the comments section. I'm Captain Gold, and I hope to see you in my next Gold Standard video.